Welcome. You are listening to Guiding Stars Evolutionary Astrology Radio. This is your host, Kristin Fontana, and I'm here today with Deva Green as we embark upon a new journey looking at Moon Saturn phases in evolutionary astrology. So I'd like to welcome Deva back to Guiding Stars. Welcome back, Deva.
Thank you for having me back.
Just last year, we looked at Jupiter and Mercury and their relationship to one another, depending on where that is in your chart, what phase they are in. And we had so much fun. We decided to look at another planetary pair because this is one of my favorite aspects of astrology, or evolutionary astrology in particular, I should say, because we really dive deep in looking at the planetary pairs and the phases in terms of your evolution and where you are with respect to those two planets. And so there's so much to understand and to dive into when you are looking at a chart, whether it's your own or somebody you love or a client. These planetary pairs just give you so much more information. They validate what you're already seeing through the Pluto paradigm, and it allows you to uncover where you are in your evolutionary journey relative to those two planets. Moon and Saturn is, Moon Mother, Father Saturn, also connects to your inner and outer world. The moon being your inner world, your emotional body, and Saturn is so much about the structural nature of the reality that you create for yourself in the world, is whether it's your career, your commitments, whatever it might be out in the physical world. And so I'm really excited about looking at these two planets and how they are reflected in the birth chart and how much more you can glean in your own chart as a result of uncovering the position of your moon Saturn. So before we dive all the way in, Dave, is there anything you would like to announce to the listeners?
Yes, it's a very exciting time for the Jeffrey Wolf Green School of Evolutionary Astrology. We're inviting translators to translate various Jeffrey Wolf Green books. We've already had some translated into different languages. So if you're interested, please email me and we'll go from there. And big thank you to our translators.
All right, sounds wonderful. And yeah, several books now in other languages. It just continues to grow and the interest grows. And for those of you who are listening and want to learn more about evolutionary astrology, you can go to the School of Evolutionaryastrology.com, and we will show you that website at the end of this webinar. All right, so let's get going. I talked very briefly about the moon being your inner world and Saturn being your outer world. But Deva, why don't you take it from here? You know a lot about the moon. I know that. You've been working with the moon a great deal in your research, and you've got the moon in Cancer. I have a Cancer rising, so yeah, we feel the moon, don't we?
We really do.
We feel it. And before we get real specific, I want to remind everybody that we evolve through the emotional body. That's moon. This is how we evolve. This is how we feel our way through our lessons. And we can't remove emotion in order to make that happen. We have to be in the water with whatever it is that we are manifesting and creating for ourselves. And so it's probably, as the moon is this ruling planet for Cancer, and anybody who has a strong Cancer emphasis, whether you've got planets in Cancer, strong fourth house, you know what I'm talking about. It increases your degree of vulnerability when you have a prominent chart with a lot of Cancerian signatures. And that's that very vulnerability that is leading you into yourself, deeper into yourself, into the water. And that is that quality within the birth chart that allows you to feel what you do in any moment. And so the moon is a very significant and important, well, it's a planetary body of sorts, not so much a planet as we understand them in that way, but it is part of and parcel to how we look at the birth chart. When we look at the nodes of the moon, it's the south node of the moon and the north node of the moon. And your natal moon in this lifetime is going to reflect your emotional journey this time around. The south node being your past, the north node being your future and where you're headed. So talk a little bit more about that, Dave. I know you've been doing a lot of work and research on the reason why the moon is so significant in the birth chart. And I think it would be a great way to set this series up.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I've really been focusing on developing how the natal moon, in specific, represents how we will go about generating an inner sense of emotional security for ourselves to create the transition from past to future. We all experience a sense of vulnerability, a sense of insecurity as we transition from the things that represent our past, the things that represent the things that no longer serve, into the future. We're all in a state of needing to become, in essence, secure with the transition from past to future in the current moment in time. And that really dovetails to what you were saying, Kristin, with respect to delving deep into the emotional waters, that the only way to really create that or to navigate the transition from past to future is to delve deeply into those emotional waters in ways that we can nurture ourselves, support ourselves, to where we can, in essence, embrace as much insecurity as we can, as we recognize we need to release patterns that are creating blocks and inhibitions and stagnations to growth. So the moon really represents how we're going to transition in the nature of the moment, or how we're going to navigate the transition from past to future with respect to the current moment in time, and on a daily basis. And from my vantage point, the secret to that really comes down to self-security. That all of us are going to have to discover ways or create ways or naturally have a way. For me, the natal moon is natural ways that we have to support ourselves. It may be resources that we don't know we have, but when you look at that natal moon, you can really energize, or you can really encourage yourself and others to look for ways to support yourself through difficult transitions through emotional waters. The moon is going to represent ways that we can do that. Um, and so you really have to, as you were saying, to really understand the totality of the archetype of the moon, to understand that within the context of the lunar nodes, the north and south node.
I have to share something. I was just talking to a client this morning who has a south node in Cancer in the 4th house, and she's getting close to retirement. And she said to me, she's a single woman, and she said to me, I finally found the ultimate relationship, and it's the one I have with myself.
Oh.
So anyway, bravo. It was something to that, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of realizing that, the more that we and she was cultivating this inner relationship to herself, enjoying the things that she would do with her time, whether it was painting or taking a bike ride or what have you. She wasn't looking outside herself for other things to complete her. She was cultivating this inner sense of security and enjoyment and strengthening, which is, it was so much about her journey with the South Node in Cancer in the 4th house. And again, you were talking about the vulnerability that the soul can feel when you're pulling away from something that you deem as secure. And with somebody coming in with the South Node in Cancer, South Node in the 4th house, you are going to be calling in a family environment where you are feeling thrown back on yourself, where you're not getting the nurturing that you need. So it's an ongoing lesson for a soul such as this. And so I won't get into the whole chart, but it was just a wonderful thing to say about that Cancerian signature, really. And when we have a south node of the moon somewhere, it doesn't mean we just forget about it. It's part of who we are, right? We are pulling that forward into this lifetime. It's the lens or the ego that your soul chose in another life in order to actualize your intentions in that life. It's a part of who you are. It's a part of your emotional makeup. But for today and throughout this series, we are going to be looking at your natal moon. And again, if you're really looking at the paradigm, you're always going to be weaving in those nodes to everything, and the Pluto placement to everything that you are viewing and trying to uncover within the birth chart. One other point I wanted to make along the lines of nobody wants to feel insecure is that I have a client who's literally reached the breaking point, or on the brink of a change, or a wanting to leave a relationship that no longer serves her. And Uranus is uh, squaring her moon currently. And so it's like there's nothing left, right? There's this feeling of I've got to make a move, I've got to make a change. And yet there's this experience of trauma that you can feel when your whole life is going to be turned upside down or completely altered. Big decisions that you have to make, you know, who moves out, who gets what do the finances look like? And it can just rock your world. So we all know as souls having a human experience how much security is so vital for how we feel within ourselves, and the stability that we feel emotionally, our ability to sleep at night, our ability to get work done, whatever it might be, our ability to stay motivated in terms of trying to embrace that North Node and to be on this journey to evolve. And as we all always say in evolutionary astrology, there's a limit to what the mind can access. Eventually, you're going to have to get into the water and
Right.
get into that lunar experience. And depending on your moon Saturn phase, it will really speak to how you work within that inner realm, how you feel within yourself relative to this moon Saturn phase. And so, any other thoughts on the moon before we talk a little bit about Saturn here?
It's also how we've imprinted, or I would say how we relate to the feminine archetype in a general sense, that it can correlate to the mother or the key female figure. And then we'll get more into Moon Saturn in terms of how we imprint mother father, how we imprint male female, inner outer, how we imprint gender dynamics. But looking at the moon too, that it's how we've developed a relationship with the feminine, how we orient to it. So looking at the moon placement, let's say for example, if you're looking, I think the example that my father typically gives is the male with the moon in Pisces or in the 12th house, that emotionally they're going to be relating to themselves much more through the feminine, much more through a hypersensitive emotional body. A woman with an Aries moon first house is typically going to be oriented towards the feminine as more of an Amazon, not to overly generalize, but a woman who desires to take action emotionally to initiate. That's going to be her self-image. That's going to be her relationship to the feminine. How she'll act on that, so to speak. So looking at the moon, you can also, uh, by the house and sign, you can also look at the person's self-image, experiences that they've had with female key mother figures, and their orientation towards the feminine.
Excellent. Yes, it's very important to remember that Capricorn, ruled by Saturn, and Cancer, ruled by the moon, connect to gender, and moon female and Saturn male. So within all of us, and we all, as souls, we're all making efforts to actualize both sides of gender within any human form. If you are a woman, it's important to actualize the male qualities within you, to be in a state of greater balance, just as it's important to stay open emotionally and to integrate the emotional body as well. So you can be a man, just like in Deva's example, but have a strong lunar influence that keeps your sensitivities high, and probably more challenging to be in the world in that way. And yet you can also be a woman who's having a strong yang or male interface and a lot of energy moving out from that center. So that can manifest with a more Saturnian or taking charge kind of energy, which is typically what we would consider to be a male quality. So yeah, all of these examples are important when you're looking at the Moon Saturn interface here. So let's talk a little bit more about Saturn too, and then we can give more examples of the Moon and Saturn as we get deeper into the examples. But so why Saturn, Deva? Okay, Deva, so why Saturn? We're talking about the Moon, and why are we looking at its relationship to Saturn apart from gender?
Yeah, Saturn's important with respect to relationship to the moon because as the moon represents our inner world, our self-image, what's going on an emotional level, Saturn is going to be our external world. Saturn is also conditioning factors of many types. The things that we imprint from the external world, it's also our role in the world. So essentially, from my vantage point, we're bringing in Saturn to the equation because it reflects our outer nature, our outer world. And it's important to see that our outer world, of course, is always going to be a reflection of our inner world. So in essence, Moon Saturn is how we're bringing our inner nature out. It's the nature of our inner and outer world. Saturn is also an important part of the Moon Saturn, or the planetary pair to the Moon, because it's how we emotionally condition, or it's how we emotionally imprint our external reality, our inner relation, our self-image that's based upon that. For many, security will come through imprinting and conforming to what's imprinted. So the Saturn moon is also very much about how we bring what we've imprinted out into the external world.
I love
Uh,
that. We talk a lot about, um, whatever you are experiencing within yourself or whatever you are energizing emotionally, whatever you energize, you materialize is a quote I remember hearing so long ago. So we know that for ourselves, however we are feeling within ourselves, whether it's vulnerability, then we might be moving in the world with less confidence. What if we're really in a confident, centered place? We're going to be manifesting things in in a different way, depending on how we are feeling within ourselves. If you're a real shy being, that shyness is going to manifest something different than somebody who's feeling very motivated and very courageous in their pursuit. So whatever we are experiencing within ourselves, we will build and create and manifest in a Saturnian way in the outside world. And one is not necessarily better than the other. It just reflects your essence, what kind of choices that you make, what kind of reality do you create for yourself based on how you live within yourself. We also know that for ourselves, when we are, you know, attracting different relationships in our life, I always share with clients that we attract where we're at. And so whatever it is that you are inwardly energizing or outwardly emanating, you are going to attract that. If you are feeling very needy inwardly, then you may attract somebody very needy. Most likely you will. And so our inner reality moon will reflect the outer structures or the outer reality that we attract and create as a result of that. And of course, we are all evolving beings. We are not static souls. And so how these symbols in our chart evolve, there's this vast like a vast definition of how our moon and whatever sign and our relationship to Saturn, how that evolves how that is defined will be very vast in its definition, depending on where you are in your own evolution. And there's shadows to it. There's a light and a shadow to how these things are expressed. And we are always all in a state of becoming. That's also important to remember, whether we're looking at the moon Saturn in a new phase example or a balsamic example. So let's go ahead and pull up that chart of the planetary phases. And this is a chart that shows the 8 phases and orbs, the planetary phases, and you can use this chart utilizing any 2 planets when you're looking at the phasal relationship between the 2. And this does look very similar to an astrological wheel because it is very similar. It's 360 degrees. It does reflect the principles of evolution. It's no difference. There's no difference here between the Aries to Pisces wheel than here with the new phase all the way to balsamic. All those areas of this wheel carry the same archetypical qualities. And the primary difference is that in an astrological wheel, those sections are divided into 12, Aries to Pisces. Here it's divided into 8, new phase all the way to balsamic. And the cycle of phases and aspects will tell you what stage of evolution your soul is in relative to the 2 planets that you're looking at, as well as how those 2 planets will operate archetypically. So for today, we are starting with Saturn and the moon in a new phase, and we always take the slower moving planet, which is Saturn in this case, and we count counterclockwise the degrees of separation between the 2 planets. We have here the moon just a few degrees away from this Saturn. This is a new phase conjunction, moon Saturn new phase conjunction. And it was interesting when looking for examples. I have to say, I could not find a lot of Saturn moon new phase conjunctions. There was a lot of squares on both sides, crises in action, crises in consciousness. I saw a lot of crescent first quarter phase squares and a lot of disseminating and last quarter phase squares, as well as balsamic in my research. I know, Deva, you had a similar struggle along those lines. So this appears to be more rare, and of course it may not be. It's just in our search, it was a challenge to find this particular conjunction. In general, though, it's important to remember too that it takes 8 lifetimes to work through the specific intention that's reflected in the main Pluto paradigm relative to these 2 planets. There's also subsidiary lives that we all experience within the journey all the way around the wheel. So it could take a minimum of 8 relative to these 2 planets in the Saturn moon conjunction here to go all the way around the zodiac or the wheel here with respect to the intentions that the soul has set out for itself. So what else have I missed here, Deva?
That when you're looking at aspects and phases, it's important to put any given aspect within the context of the phase that it's in, because we have 2 different kinds of conjunctions, 2 different kinds of squares, 2 different kinds of trines, oppositions, inconjunctions, and so on. So the phase is going to give the aspect its meaning or context to interpret relative to the totality of the birth chart. We're starting here, new series, new phase, Aries energy, initiatory, pulling away from the past. And a conjunction can occur in either a new phase or a balsamic phase or closing phase. Those are going to be 2 different types of energies, even though it's the same aspect. That conjunction in the balsamic or closing phase is very much going to be around a culmination of everything that's happened before. So it's like a closure, bringing things into a state of release in order for that new phase to be able to happen. So while the new phase is very much very strong energy in terms of initiation, breaking away from the past, moving things forward, the balsamic phase, there's almost like a feeling of wanting that first phase, but knowing that things need to be brought to resolution first before that can happen. So with the balsamic phase, it's very much more of a Pisces feeling, Neptune feeling, 12th house. While in the new phase, it's first house Aries, Mars energy, just to provide context in terms of why you need, why the phase, why you would need to start with the phase to give any given aspect its correct interpretation.
Excellent. Thank you for remembering to share that. That's so important. The phase, just understanding the nature of the phase and or what the definition of that phase is. As you said, the Aries energy throughout that whole phase. Of course, as you're deeper in the phase, it's going to carry more of a Taurian quality to it. At the new phase conjunction, that Saturn Moon new phase conjunction, that is all Aries. It's like brand new beginning, brand new evolutionary intention. And this soul will want full freedom to express whatever it is that they wish to express. And you spoke a bit about the woman with the moon in Aries. A Saturn moon new phase is going to, they're going to embody that same kind of Aryan fire and the need to control their environment, the need to be in charge, the natural leadership qualities, a pioneer of sorts, and wanting to not be limited by anything. And so even if you don't have moon in Aries or you don't have moon in the first house, but you feel very Aryan in your ways in the world, and at work you're the one that's put in charge of things all the time, perhaps you may have a Saturn moon new phase or a new phase conjunction even. Someone who's got the energy, the drive, the determination, the ambition to really take things all the way to the height of a climb. And again, not wanting to be limited by anything on the way there. All right. Anything else to say about that new phase besides just this brand new evolutionary spirit of initiation?
Yeah, that self-discovery occurs through the initiation. So to understand why that full phase, especially, or why the new phase, especially at the beginning, can feel so full throttle. It's because the intention is to discover something new, or it's learning through initiation, self-discovery occurring through potential experiences. So it's another way of saying that self-discovery is linked with what's to come. So the feeling of not being limited or wanting maximum freedom is one, to pull away from the past, and also to discover through the initiated action, the feedback to the reaction, something new about the soul.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
that's the intention of the intensity of that new phase. At times, it's the soul wanting to unearth a new part of its identity, in a sense.
Right. It's like every time they have a new experience, they're going to respond to it, maybe react to it, and then they learn from it. And they say, I don't want to do that again. Or maybe, yeah, I want to do that again. I want to learn more about what that is. But having the freedom to have these purely random experiences, even this fundamental freedom, is so critical for someone in this phase. The soul is incredibly independent and dependent on initiating a diversity of experiences, because that is how they are learning. That is how they are learning what this next evolutionary sweep is going to be about. If the soul is restricted or feels restricted, this can cause anger. That's the dark side of Aries. And so it's just like the Saturn element here, feeling any kind of limitation or controlled by someone else that could activate or trigger this experience of anger, not wanting to be fenced in any way. Aries is meant to lead, not follow, as well. So that is all part of what this is about. Now, ultimately, of course, it's going to progressively narrow down over time, depending on the lifetimes, depending on what the soul is pursuing and going after, as it's deeper into the new phase. For example, if it's not at the conjunction, but maybe further along in the new phase, there will be a progressive narrowing down and eliminating of the things, and due to the experiences the soul has had about whether, or about what it wants because of what it learned from all this freedom and all these new experiences that it's had. So the emphasis here is on a new cycle in evolutionary development, emotional experiences as well. All right. Did we forget anything, or do you want to jump to our examples?
Examples.
Okay, let's move along. All right. Oh, well, perfect for a third house, Saturn moon here, and a Pisces moon to boot. So go ahead and take this one.
Okay, so Elvis Presley, in his natal chart, he has Pluto and Cancer in the 8th house retrograde. He's got South Node in Leo in the 8th house, North Node being in Aquarius in the 2nd, the ruler of the South Node, the Sun, Capricorn in the 2nd house, and the ruler of the North Node is going to be Uranus and Aries in the 5th. Moon Saturn in a new phase, Saturn in Aquarius, conjunct Moon in Pisces in the 3rd house. Well, it's a little white for a conjunction, but it's in the new phase. Saturn being in Pisces, or Saturn being in Aquarius in the 3rd, Moon being in Pisces in the 3rd. So from an evolutionary perspective, looking at this Moon Saturn, you can see the intention to, through the act of bringing in a whole new way of communicating, reinventing the way that music was almost presented, at least in my point of view,
Definitely.
through shot. I mean, and my intake of it is, it wasn't somebody who was, trying to provoke in any way, but it's somebody who was trying to promote a different point of view through shock.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was, I'm going to come out, and from my inner world, from my Moon in Pisces in the 3rd house, I'm going to be Saturn in Aquarius.
Shock your socks off.
Shock your socks off.
Yeah.
And that was his own way of communicating, and that was his own way of indicating that transformation or liberation ultimately, which was one of the deepest messages I feel his music conveyed in various ways, occurs from the inside out. Look at this South Node being in Leo in the 8th, Pluto being in Cancer in the 8th retrograde, your North Node being in Aquarius in the 2nd. It was like through instinctually being able to have experiences where he could bring his inner self out into the world through a structured career that was very unique. It was like this realization, or he was able to touch base with an emotional quality that transformation is really occurring from the inside out. Aquarius in the 2nd. He had a deep obsession with death, looking at all this 8th house energy, that he was constantly thinking about the process of death, in the sense of transformation, and that transferring throughout his life, or progressively realizing that transformation that he was so preoccupied with was something that happens through the 2nd house. In a relationship with self, relative to liberation, relative to breaking free. And for him, that was, at least from my point of view, that was coming through the dynamic of individuation, and through always, I mean, he does have an energy here of always pushing those limits, of saying, why do those limits need to be? And looking at this Moon Saturn in Aquarius, Moon in Pisces, you can see that bringing out also his sense of disillusionment with structure relative to rebellion,
Mm-hmm.
because he wasn't able to mirror himself, looking at this moon in Pisces through creative pursuits that he had in the past. My perspective is that he may have had a special role. He may have been in a position of being recognized or validated for a creative gift. But this moon Saturn, Aquarius Pisces, gosh, how do I bring my inner self out? How do I bring that my inner relationship with myself, how I really see myself, how do I bring this out here? Where's that transformation process?
Mm-hmm.
So looking at this, it was like he was trying to reconfigure around this kind of shocking and this type of pushing the normal boundaries, wanting to dissolve those, seeing the moon in Pisces.
He sure did that with his feet too. You know, the way he danced.
Yeah.
Always this kind of shake to his feet. That's Saturn in Aquarius with the moon in Pisces. Pisces, right, connects to the feet. And he was just known for what he was, how he created a new style, not only with his music and his songs and his lyrics and how those were put together, but what he did on stage with his feet in particular. I would say his whole body, of course. And, this need for unlimited content, right? And this massive fame that occurred as a result. And we see that oftentimes with the Pisces element, and we've got Jupiter, his chart ruler, in the 12th house in Scorpio. So this power through his music that he held, like he was hypnotizing these women through his music, all over the world, just falling at his feet, his Pisces feet. So that was an excellent example. Do you have any memories, or did you check out any lyrics, Deva? You're usually really keen on that. Any Elvis lyrics?
Oh gosh, none that I can think of at the time.
You were not even, I wasn't, well, when was he born? What year was it? Do you remember?
Let's see.
I can't
Gosh.
remember either. But, it had been a long time later when you graced us with your presence on this planet. So anyway, I'm not expecting it to be in your repertoire, his music there. All right, well, we'll get back to them on that, but let's go ahead and move to the next chart. Bob Dylan, awesome. Okay, so we got a Saturn moon new phase conjunction in the 5th house. Of course, when we think of the 5th house, it's a Leo house. It's about being on stage with his music. That Taurian element ruled by Venus is a big one for music, and that Venus is in Gemini in the 6th house with the sun. Definitely his lyrics reflect that conjunction there in the 6th house. But his music also did have such a timeless quality to it, with that Saturn moon new phase in the 5th trining Neptune, and the North Node in the 9th house. This also reaching international realms, and cross country lines with his music, international fame as well. What else do you have on him, Deva? Bob Dylan.
Yeah, that for him too, part of that process was rebelling from any sort of external label that attempted to impose a value system that he could not, that he didn't want to limit himself by. Looking at the Saturn, Moon, Uranus, Taurus in the 5th, he was very much known for, my music is what my music is. Please don't try to label, classify, Dylanify, put it into any sort of category. So looking at this Taurus energy in the 5th, Saturn, Moon, Uranus, that it was also very much about liberating or breaking from these kind of these Taurian senses of I feel secure if I label, or how can I relate to it? I can relate to it if I classify. Also seeing this South Node being in Pisces in the third, as you were saying, his message was universal. He wanted the freedom to explore, to pursue, to, in a sense, kind of put a Uranian feeling on the Saturn. And
Mm-hmm.
also the moon, to not be restricted or to rebel against those kind of labels. And from my point of view, his lyrics really speak to, as you were saying, that timeless quality of touching those inner waters, looking at this moon in Taurus in the fifth. Also Saturn there, something you could really relate to because of the power of having no label. And because it was very much universal in nature. One of my favorite lyrics by him are, "The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind,"
Right.
meaning that
Exactly. That.
we can all be receptive to this, that is something we're all plugged into, with South Node being in Pisces. So the instinct, or the instinctual desire, in terms of uh, bringing his inner life into the outer, would very much be about revolutionizing those things, revolutionizing those labels, through a very Uranian type of stance.
It's Uranian because of the blowing in the wind, but it's also Piscean because it's universal, right? We're all hardwired to have a certain experience,
Yes.
right? We're not limited by anything. We're only limited by ourselves. So with his South Node in Pisces, is Mars in Pisces, and of course ruled by that Neptune on the North Node, which is trining that Saturn moon. Uh, it's giving freedom for that new phase to find it for yourself,
Yeah.
right? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The freedom to find it for yourself. Everybody can have it if they want it. So, yeah, very inspiring. He was such a great storyteller as well with his songs. So many of his songs, stories about his own life. I think he's talking about his mother being a tailor and sewing this or that for him. And just a simple life in New Orleans he's singing about. And the lyrics, the storytelling in particular, with the ruler of his Saturn moon in Taurus, um, being Venus in Gemini conjunct that sun. It's a wide conjunction, but it's there. And of course, he's got Mercury in Gemini as well. So yeah, I love his music, and it is timeless. It's music that uh, it just does transcend time and space through all that Pisces. Something new, yet something new that he brought to this world, as did Elvis. And people can close their eyes and listen to a piece of his music and know it's him. That kind of quality, right? It's memorable. I think too with Saturn Moon, it's about the new phase. It leaves a memory and a mark, really, right? It's when you hear a song and you're reminded of a certain time in your past, and it evokes some kind of emotion. And I feel like obviously Elvis and Bob Dylan both have that capacity to unlock emotion through their passion, through their purpose, through the power of who they are as souls, and they're inspirational through their messages as well. All right. Anything more about Bob Dylan from your lens? Look at that. Both had eighth house Plutos, by the way.
Wow. Yeah. Looking at this too, like dovetailing off what you said, finding it for yourself. Looking at the Taurus energy in the fifth, that can be a vehicle, or that can be a way for coming out into the world, seeing a strong emphasis here on self-sufficiency, a strong emphasis on actualizing your own values, in this case being a musician and almost a poet in many ways, with the South Node being in the third. So an instinctual way for him to communicate, or an instinctual way for him to feel the right structure of coming out into the world, how he would go about structuring himself would very much be around empowering that sense of doing it for yourself, finding it for yourself, that we all have this capacity to do for ourselves. And that becoming a way for a structure for that emotional intensity relative to the eighth house Pluto, the emotional waters that are so inspirational and transformative to take a
Mhm.
structure or a form.
Absolutely. I mean, we all know that experience of feeling as if you're able to experience metamorphosis through just listening to music, right? The emotion that you might feel through the music and what it allows, what that allows to shift within you
Mm-hmm.
by listening to certain types of music. And you can see, of course, these are two, Elvis and Bob Dylan. They are their own bosses, clearly. There they
Yes.
are, center stage with the guitar and um, with their with their band behind them. They're in charge of their destiny, and they want full freedom to dance, to play, to sing as they wish. These are perfect examples of a Saturn moon new phase, especially with eighth house Plutos, pushing those limits, with the music they're playing, the guitar piece that Bob Dylan might be challenging himself with, and in Elvis's case, the shock value that he so enjoyed to create for his audience. And it was, what can I surprise them with next? So, anyway, these are wonderful examples of a Saturn moon new phase. All right, we can move to the next one. Drew Barrymore. Now, Drew Barrymore, I could not believe when I was reading about her how many movies she's been in. The list just went on and on. I mean, a lot of them I had not seen, but of course, the first one that I ever saw that she's most famous for was E.T. She was just a little tyke at that point. Now she's directing and producing and writing. She's not just acting. And talk about a woman in a man's world, right? I mean, she's powerful in her own right. She's well, I think she came through a family of in the entertainment business, of course, her father, right? So being born into a family, right, that's already giving you a doorway in, so to speak. So what do you know about Drew Barrymore, Deva?
That part of the intention of her films, from what I understand, also is to communicate, or it's to help those who have suffered from self-image issues, or who have felt that in one way or another that they're kind of the rejects. Or that they're the underdogs,
Right.
or not being seen for who they are in one way or another. Um, so looking at this part of that Saturn in Cancer in the first, and Moon being in Cancer in the second, is to come out there into the world in a way that encourages those who have had self-image issues uh, to uh, um, uh, to to nurture themselves. We were talking about internal security, or to it's like a way of internalizing messages that are more affirmative. Looking at Cancer in the second would very much emphasize self-worth. Um, and I remember one of her movies, First Kiss, and she goes back. She's a reporter, and she's going undercover, and she goes back into a high school where she was essentially the underdog, the outcast, the one who was always weird. um, and she re-experiences all the rejection of in her high school, but because she's undercover and a lot more mature and stable in herself, Moon and Cancer in the second, she's able to give it a totally different voice. South Node in Gemini in the 12th.
Yeah.
So part of that Saturn new phase, or at least from my perspective, from an evolutionary point of view, is also promoting inner stability, or promoting self-worth with respect to prior experiences of either being the underdog, the outcast, of always being the one that was a bit with the 12th house seen as a little bit, off base.
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, she definitely has that girl next door demeanor uh,
mm-hmm.
that a lot of the fans of hers enjoy. And she was only 6, I discovered, when she was in ET. That was her breakout moment. That would have been a good chart to look up what was going on astrologically at that time. She's the girl next door, of course, is very much a Virgo kind of quality there, or Virgo Cancer, I would say. That North Node in the 6th, Saturn, Moon, new phase in Cancer. Um, but I was also, she was in The Wedding Singer, which was hysterical. I think that came out when I was in high school. I can't even remember. It's been so long ago. But no, she's done comedies as well through North Node and Sag and conjunct Neptune, of course. We all have to laugh. I think that is, she probably wrote about in her book. That's how she got through her own life. Humor humor has a way of healing, and it's incredible medicine. I'm sure it was a very, and just to grow up in the way that she did. She had her own apartment when as a teenager. That's how early, because she was making it work in the world and famous so early on, and had so much money and fame in her own right. And she was, I think one of the things they said in her book is that she was talking about how laundry saved her. It was about, kind of learning to do something, having control of something, right? Beginning, middle, and an end, and something that she had to do for herself. And, that'll really, keep you humble, having to do those simple tasks for yourself, and to learn to take care of yourself in that way. But yeah, she's had an incredible amount of success, and from my eyes, at least, she's maintained a humility within it all. Pretty hard not to, with some of those signatures in that chart. And looking here astrologically, wow, she just came through some big. Pluto's right on her Mars, so I'm sure there's more to come. There's more we will learn and experience through her work and the films she chooses to write or produce or to act in. But yeah, a woman in charge of herself. I would say that at the very least. Any last thoughts on her?
I would say too, how she's also somebody who, through taking care of yourself and looking at the Saturn in the first retrograde, and also the Moon in Cancer in the second, is also promoting a sense of pushing the boundaries of male-female.
Right.
That she's in, as you were saying, that she's self-initiatory, that she's in charge of herself, Saturn new phase, and she's learning to value that. Moon in Cancer in the second, or she's learning the benefits, or she's learning the wisdom of those really simple little things that you can do to care for yourself, that promote that sense of being able to come out in the world in a secure way.
Exactly.
So it will, with that Pluto Mars, seeing what's to come next, or seeing what message she wants to portray relative to films. Neptune, Neptune North Node Sag in the 6th house. Those could be very much orientated towards uh, helping those who have been underprivileged in certain ways, seeing the North Node being in the 6th, also seeing the Pisces energy in the 10th. So definitely what's to come.
Yeah. Well, whenever I see Saturn Moon in Cancer, Saturn Moon even in the conjunction in this way, I would absolutely see this as someone who's forced to grow up fast. And this is
Yeah.
her choice. Hey, I want to act. I'm 6 years old. I'm in one of the biggest films in the world. So yes, she's playing the part of a little child in this film, but you're on a set and you have responsibilities and you have lines to learn. So it was true that she, by choice, was forced to grow up fast. And it can be that experience for souls who have a Saturn Moon new phase like this, that it's like parenting yourself at a young age. at times. We're forced to do that because of the environments that you find yourself in. So anyway, yeah, she's definitely a soul that was forced to take charge uh, of herself at a young age and be in charge of herself and as much as she could, her choices. All right, let's go to the last chart. Scarlett. Excuse me. All right. She's the highest paid actress, I believe, since like 2018. And one of her films, Black Widow, I did not see that movie, but it um, was one of her big films. And The Avengers, of course, that was a ways back. Well, Avengers Endgame was in 2019. But she's got Saturn and Moon new phase in Scorpio in the 12th house. And of course, this reflects her fame. And in the film business, 12th house is film and definitely a sex symbol. Although she doesn't feel victimized by that. It's just, or singled out by it, I think is what she said. I don't feel singled out by it or victimized by it. She knows that by putting herself in the limelight in this way, that it kind of comes with the turf. And you know, she's got quite a powerful presence. And some of the films that she's Black Widow in particular, of course, is a Scorpio energy right there. But the Avengers and some of these other films that she's been a part of, very much 11th house sort of futuristic films, and taking on the lead role in those films. Very much a Saturn Moon new phase. Excuse me. All right, and then of course that Mars in Aquarius as well, squaring that Pluto and Scorpio. Did you see any of her films, Deva?
No, I haven't.
What can you see here by the chart with the Saturn Moon new phase in Scorpio that you might want to share? Some little addition to what I've offered here.
Yeah, in terms of the theme of taking the lead, or in terms of the theme of Saturn Moon being places where you naturally have to take stock of yourself in ways. Looking at the Saturn Moon Scorpio in the 12th house, there might have been dynamics of powerlessness relative to uh, developing a more timeless, or developing connections more with her internal world, more with timeless energies, seeing Moon in the 12th house. So there may have been an experience of having having the rug pulled out from underneath the feet, because of her desire to create a reality that was also based upon a connection to energies that were universal or timeless, and that being a way to culminate, or a way to release limitations of the ways that she had put herself out there in the world, because we're looking at Scorpio moon, but then we're looking at new phase. So there's also a new cycle happening relative to how she's structured in the world. There may have been experiences where where she was abandoned, also times where she was on both sides of powerlessness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But from my understanding, looking at Saturn Moon, that the ultimate intention is to connect to something eternal, or it's like trusting that the inner waters will also provide that energy for metamorphosis, for transformation,
Right.
um, uh, and that could be a way that's a way of taking charge, or that can be her inside, her inner world coming out also through the work that she does in the world.
Yeah, you know, it was perfect what you said about having the rug kind of ripped out beneath her, whether it was this life or a past life with that Pluto square Mars, Pluto being the ruler of that Saturn moon new phase in Scorpio. She's just coming through a balsamic, period in her evolutionary cycle relative to those two planets. So oftentimes if there's a tight conjunction here, they can feel to be straddling both worlds in a sense. And
Mm.
absolutely a life for getting her power back. and for doing it like brick by brick, buck by buck, and dollar by dollar. I mean, the
Uh-huh.
North Node is in Taurus. It's ruled by Venus. She's earned every penny. Yes, she's been getting the big bucks, but it's like she really came here with something to prove and something that she needed to earn on her own. Because absolutely, this is a chart of someone who's run in powerful circles before, but was left holding the bag. It's like being married to somebody and they just bailed and just left her with nothing in a sense. So she's got a lot of there's signatures here that connect to kind of earning it all back, right? Not marrying into power and money, but earning it and becoming it on her own. That's a Taurus second house intention here. It's balsamic. And, you know, absolutely there's going to be lessons around learning who to trust. And she would have reattracted plenty of people in the past, people that have betrayed her, and she would have had to make choices relative to whether she can trust them in whatever way she feels she can moving forward. So we always will circle back with those that we have unfinished business with. She clearly has unfinished business here with Venus balsamic to Jupiter, which is the ruler of her chart. Jupiter is, and that Venus being the ruler of her North Node. But the film industry, that stage gave her a place to recover that power and to play out the different roles that she needed to in order to heal the past. Also, one last thing before, with Drew Barrymore and with Scarlett Johansson, if you can look at them and see this Cancerian quality that they have, right? Obviously, Drew Barrymore has Saturn and the moon in Cancer, but the moon's so close to Saturn, it is conditioning, they're mutually conditioning each other, those energies in a way. The moon is infusing that Saturn, and to have it so close to Saturn, you can feel the little girl next door with Drew Barrymore. Here you can see the natural innocence deep within the intensity of Scarlett Johansson. There is a tenderness about her that just is revealed in this particular photo. And obviously in other roles she's played, she might be able to mask that through her Scorpio powers and magic, but there is a Cancerian quality that I really love in this image. So anyway, that was a great start. I love the planetary pairs. Looking at Saturn moon is a whole new world. It's a whole new ball game, very different than Jupiter Mercury. It's all about our security. It's all about what we're going to manifest here in the world that will support our evolutionary journey moving forward. So find out where yours is, and we'll get there eventually. If we didn't get there today, this is just Saturn and moon, and we'll be back looking at Saturn and the moon in a crescent phase next time. And thank you, Deva, so much for joining me again today.
Thank you so
All right.
much for the time today.
All right, if you're interested in checking out the website, schoolofelevolutionaryastrology.com, to learn more about what we're talking about, go ahead and visit the site. And we do have a message board there if you like to ask questions further. And we will be back next time looking at Saturn Moon Crescent Phase. Until next time, namaste.